This is part two of our discussion on web search engines and the use of the internet as a tool to find health information. So in our last discussion, we focused on the quality of the information. With this one, we're going to focus on how to make that process a lot more time efficient. I think we've all had the experience of needing to learn something. Maybe you're writing a paper on a topic that has to do with, I don't know, diabetes or some other health topic, and you start off by just putting the word diabetes in Google. You hit the search button and get billions of results in a fraction of a second, and then you find yourself spending the next 20 minutes just going through and trying to make sense of those results and finding something that's actually relevant to what it is that you need to write about. Well, we're going to focus on that today, and we're going to do this from a couple perspectives. One will be with respect to how search engines actually work. So we're going to talk a little bit about the technology behind them in terms of how it is that they do what it is that they do. I think by understanding that, we can get a better appreciation for the limitations and for how we should and shouldn't use them, and just some better approaches that we can take with them. The other part has to do really with how we go about the process of doing the search and how we think about that search. So it's more of a behavioral issue than it is a technological issue. So if I were to go through some of the key reasons that I think web searches are often inefficient, well, I think probably the biggest one is that we start off with kind of a vague concept that we start to search for, without really having a good understanding of the specific thing that it is that we're trying to actually get to. In other words, we have a big topic and we're starting off with that big topic without really thinking through what it is specifically that we need at that moment in time in order to do what it is we need to do next. You know, writing that next paragraph or that next page or that next section in your paper, or giving a particular piece of advice or making a decision about something. So we want to get a better idea of what the big picture is in terms of the information that's out there and what we specifically need to know from that giant big population of information. And the idea here is that if you don't know really what it is that you're looking for, if you don't have a clear visualization of what it is that you actually specifically need to learn, you're not going to recognize it when you see it. So when we get those billions of results in Google, it's hard to know which of those results are really going to be relevant to us because we haven't really thought it through to that level. So the remedy here is actually fairly simple. It's really investing some time up front in terms of thinking through what it is that we're trying to get at based upon all that information that is out there. So if we take the example of cardiovascular disease, it's a big topic. And if we just sample a few of the subtopics within that giant topic of cardiovascular disease, we'll see some of the things on our chart here. Diagnostic techniques and medications and cigarette smoking and genetic predispositions and surgical interventions. Okay, all these things are various aspects of cardiovascular disease. Now, presumably, we don't need to know everything there is to know about cardiovascular disease when we do a search. We need to know about one of these subtopics, and within that subtopic, we need to be even much more specific in terms of having a particular piece of information that is going to solve our problem at hand. So we want to start off having this appreciation for what the big picture looks like, and then where it is that we want to go within there. Where do we want to drill down to? Am I learning? Do I need to learn more about a specific medication that's used to treat cardiovascular disease? Am I trying to learn about the possible varieties of medications? Am I trying to learn what cardiac rehab protocols look like following a surgery? We want to get down into those particular levels. Now, to do this, generally the approach that I like to use here is to just try to find one little, I'll call it a bite-sized piece of information that you need to know. Now, typically we don't go in with just one piece of information that we need to know. Typically there's going to be multiple things that you're going to need to learn. Well, rather than trying to get at all those pieces all at once with one search and one source, we want to break it down into multiple searches and just accept the fact that you're going to be going into Google or Bing or whatever it is multiple times to look for different pieces of information each time. So we want to break those pieces of information down into little bite-sized chunks and then structure each search after one of those chunks. Now, it's going to sound like it's a little more work, which in some ways it kind of is. You're investing more time up front. But by doing this, you will get to the results much more efficiently than if you try to do this big broad-based search where you just get everything at once and you got it all waiting for you in one place. The odds of that happening are really, really low. You're going to do much better going after individual pieces of information one at a time. Now, the approach that is generally recommended, and this isn't just my approach, this is typically how it's done, is that we write research questions. So the research question, the idea here is that for each piece of information that you need, you write a question that asks what it is that you want to learn. In other words, word this in the form of a question. And then for each one of those questions, we then conduct a search. So that question then guides your individual searches. Now, the idea of the research question is that it does a couple things for you. First of all, it forces you to think through what it is that you're really trying to get to. So you have to invest that time to really thinking it through. If you don't think it through, you really can't write the question. So we can kind of work backwards from there, is that it helps us organize our thinking a little bit in terms of what are the individual specific pieces of information we need to get to, and how do they relate to that big picture topic. The other things that the research questions help us do is they help us stay focused and on track as we're doing the search. So we're not getting sidetracked and going off in different directions. They also help us measure success. We're going to know when we're able to answer the question. When we find that website that contains the information that answers that question, we've been successful. We have a very clear measure of when we can go on to the next question. So it makes it a lot less of a vague, just hunting and searching and looking process, and much more of a specific, write the question, answer the question, go on to the next question. So we know when to stop, we know when to go on to the next thing. So here are the rules for a good research question. And I basically have 4 of them. First of all, it has to be written down. Okay, and that can be on paper or that could be on the computer, but you have to have it recorded somewhere so that you can go back and revisit it. And you're going to want to revisit it to make sure you've answered it properly. This is the thing that's going to keep you on track as you're doing your search. So you have to be able to go back and revisit it. Also, when it's written down, it helps you write a better question. Okay, these really need a little bit of attention to detail. You need to focus on them and do a really good job of writing the question, because everything comes from that question after that. They need to be in the form of a question. Okay, you don't want to state a research question as a topic. In other words, you don't want the research question to be medications used for heart disease. That's not really a question. It's just kind of a phrase. Thirdly, they need to be grammatically correct. And all this means is you need to put a little bit of effort into it. Okay, don't just jot down a few words and go on to the next thing. Put a little bit of effort into it. Again, the clear thinking and that investment in that thought process is really the thing that's of value here. So these are all ways to help ensure that you're doing that. Now, fourth, and this one may be the most important, they have to be very specific. A vague research question is not going to get you very far. What are treatments for heart disease is an incredibly vague question. Yes, it's a question, it's grammatically correct, it's written, it can be written down, but it's unbelievably vague. What kind of heart disease? What kind of treatments? There could be a ton of different answers here that can all apply, and they, the vast majority of them could be totally unrelated to what it is that we really need to know. So the research question needs to be very specific. So here is an example of a vague research question. What happens to athletes who use steroids? Now, if we look at this question a little bit, on the surface, it kind of sounds like, okay, I think I know what we're looking for here. But there's really a lot of assumptions that can be made here. And those assumptions, there's a nuance here. It's kind of subtle, but they play into how you ultimately do the search. So again, making this a more specific question is going to help us do a better search. And unfortunately, very often we kind of have this need for quick results, and it kind of works against us. We're really better off kind of thinking it through and then going into the actual search. So here are some of the assumptions that would be inherent. Now, assuming that what we're really looking for is information that has to do with athletes who use steroids to improve their performance, and what we're trying to get at are what are some of the negative health consequences, this question leaves a lot to be assumed. So for example, what happens? Okay, the word happens, I would argue, is rather vague because this could be taken to mean two different things. It might mean, well, what are some of the positive things that happen? How well does it improve their athletic performance? Are we talking about maybe it improves their social interactions with other teammates who also use steroids? Maybe it it does other things that are positive. So what happens doesn't necessarily mean what we think it means if we're thinking that it means something negative. So we would want the word happens to go away. We would want to replace that with something much more precise that gets to what it is that we're actually looking for. Use steroids. Okay, I'm going to argue that is also vague. What types of steroids? Are we talking about corticosteroids, which are often used to treat a variety of things therapeutically and are prescribed by doctors as a way to reduce inflammation? They're used for some sorts of autoimmune diseases. There's a whole bunch of reasons for using corticosteroids that are completely legitimate. Now, if we're talking anabolic steroids that are maybe used not under a doctor's supervision to treat a disease, but are used in a self-medicating way to help improve athletic performance, that's a whole different story. So we can't just assume that steroids means what we think it means. Again, we need to be very precise there. What does use mean? Okay, how often are we talking about? If even we accept that we're talking about illicit anabolic steroids, are we talking one-time use? Are we talking weekly use? Are we talking daily use? And for what time period? Is this like a week of use? Is this a year of use? Is it years of use? So again, we want to make sure we understand what it is that we're actually looking for. So if we take some of these things and build them into a better research question, we might have something like this. What are negative health consequences to male? Now, by the way, when we're talking about athletes, if we're talking male or female, it makes a difference when we're talking about the use of steroids. What are negative health consequences to male high school football athletes who have a long-term use of unprescribed anabolic steroids to enhance athletic performance? Okay, so now we've taken that and we've made it much more precise. Now, there's probably some stuff missing from that. We don't have anything in there about frequency, but it doesn't have to be a perfect research question. It just needs to be specific enough to get us to the source that's going to help us to answer that. And if we can get down to the point of making it this specific, then we're probably going to be right in the ballpark of where we need to be. So again, it doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to be specific enough so it is crystal clear what it is that we're looking for. The basic rule of thumb here is that you should be able to take that research question to a research librarian in the library, hand it to them without saying a word, and they should know precisely what it is that you're looking for without any other explanation needed. Okay, that's kind of what we're striving for. So again, this is kind of an example of vague versus specific. So we want to make sure we incorporate those 4 rules. As a review, the rules are: it has to be written down, it has to be in the form of a question, grammatically correct, and very specific. Here's some additional questions, and these are ones that I pulled from various sources. What are the detrimental neurological risks associated with long-term use of marijuana? What are the negative long-term health consequences for patients using immunosuppressant drugs for autoimmune disease treatment? How does alcohol consumption negatively affect a developing fetus during pregnancy? What are negative cognitive effects of caffeinated beverages on college students? Are there any long-term nutritional benefits on the digestive systems when children ages 6 to 10 consume raw kale? And by the way, some of these actually came from students' research papers in prior semesters of Health Science 391. But again, they kind of are good examples of how we can take these concepts, put them on paper, and then word them in a specific way. So starting point is always this concept of writing the research question. So it's kind of the psychological aspect of this, or the behavioral aspect of it. And we really don't want to shortchange it. You want to invest that time up front because it's going to direct all your efforts going forward. Now, by the way, once that research question is written, you're going to have a much better idea of what words you should be putting into your search engine. We'll be talking about that aspect of it in class when we do the face-to-face lab. So we'll pull up some search engines and we'll actually do some searches together, and we'll utilize some of the advanced search tools in some of the various search engines when we do that. Now, let's talk a little bit about the technology and the role of search engines. So I want to talk a little bit about how they work. And the little subtitle there, "They don't actually search the internet," is actually quite true. But I would add another couple words to that. They don't actually search the internet in real time. So there's kind of a perception that when we do a search, that Google or Bing or whatever it is going out and searching every single website on the internet in a couple of, in a few milliseconds, and then returning those results. And that's actually a very unrealistic expectation, because there are hundreds of millions, if not billions, of websites on the internet. There's no way to search all of those in real time in thousandths of a second. It just can't happen. So the way search engines work is they do their searches in advance. Before you even get to the keyboard, they've already done the search. And the way I like to think about it is, and it's using kind of the classic metaphor for the internet and the World Wide Web, the word web here being key, is that it's kind of like a spider web. So if you think about a spider web, where you got a spider builds a web, and on that web little insects come along, get trapped, and then the spider crawls around, finds an insect, eats it or takes it back to its little spider abode, and then goes on to the next insect. And that's just kind of how like the World Wide Web works. So the World Wide Web, all it is a giant network of computers. And on that network, we've got websites all throughout. And those websites might be associated with an individual computer. You could have multiple websites on an individual computer, but they're all throughout the web. So you can use this visualization of the spider web to kind of help you think about the internet, where the websites are represented by these little insects that have been caught on the spider web. Now, the way search engines work is that they're not searching every time you do a search in real time. What they're doing is they do it in advance, and they do it with something called web crawlers. Now, there's actually other terms for these. These are also called bots, short for robots. Sometimes they're called spiders. But they kind of work really well with this metaphor, because what they do is they essentially crawl around the internet looking for websites, just like the spider crawls around its spider web looking for insects. When a web crawler finds a website, it kind of reports back to headquarters. So for a web crawler, headquarters is going to be the search engine that dispatched it. So Google, for example, has a whole bunch of web crawlers. They're basically little computer programs that just search around the internet looking for websites. And specifically, they're looking for websites that they don't know about yet. So they're trying to find new websites, and they're also trying to find websites that they do know about that maybe have changed since their last visit. So they're constantly out looking. If you want an actual visualization of what websites on the internet can look like, here's a very small example of one. So these are results from a web crawler that has gone out and found web pages and then mapped how those web pages link to one another. And here we can see all of those various linkages. At the bottom, a little bit hard to see on this graphic, there actually are visualizations there of the actual URLs where those web pages come from. So this is essentially the process that occurs here. The web crawler goes out, finds the web pages, reports back, and here again are the addresses where those web pages are found, along with the title of the web page, and there's the address alongside. Now, once they're found, here's what happens next. They go into a database. So again, because web search engines don't search the internet in real time, what they're doing is they're searching a database that they create. So Google, for example, creates its own database. So we start off with this idea here of the internet. So here we've got our cloud, or our web. You've got these web crawlers that crawl around that web and they find web pages. And when they do, they basically record the information. They send it to something called an indexer. And what the indexer does, it creates an index of the words in those web pages. They basically suck all the words out of the web pages and record them in a database along with the source of those words. Once they're in that database, Google can then use those to do searches. So in other words, if you're looking for the word diabetes, Google already knows all the web pages that contain the word diabetes. And because of this indexing process, the indexing basically means they're all sorted in the order of those words that you're looking for. It's able to return the results much more quickly. So as an example, here's what a very, very small, very simple example of what the database might look like. Every occurrence of the word diabetes in a web page on the internet is contained in the database. And I should say every occurrence of every web page that Google is aware of on the internet is contained in the database, along with the source of that web page. So the sorting here, the indexing, is done based on that contained word. So in this case, it's an alphabetical order of all these words. So here we have diabetes, diabetic, dialysis. So all words that are sorted in alphabetical order. Again, this is a very overly simplified example, but it kind of has to be to really show it, because there are billions of occurrences of these words in the database. Now, if you say that you want to find the word diabetes or diabetic, for example, I'm searching the word diabetic, what happens is that Google then essentially just goes to that section of its database. Because they're already sorted, it already knows all the web pages, and it can tell you in a fraction of a second, here are all the web pages that contain the word diabetic. Again, it just has to go to that section of the database. combining it with another word, diabetic patient or diabetic juvenile or something along those lines, again, now it can combine it because it's got it indexed. So it's ultra fast for it to return those results. So the bottom line, Google is not searching the internet, it's searching its database. Now that we know that how it works and the technology behind it, we should think about what are some of the limitations to that, because it does affect the way that we get results. So for example, no one search engine contains everything on the internet. Google does not know every single thing that's out there on the internet. Yahoo doesn't know. Bing doesn't know. Their databases are limited by what their bots have been able to find and return. So the search engines are all different. Bing does not have the same results as Yahoo or Google, or vice versa. Some of the databases are a little fresher than others with respect to certain web pages. Some bots may have visited a web page yesterday and have picked up on any changes in that web page, while a different bot may not have visited it for a month, and the information there is out of date by a month. So the different search engines will return different results because their databases are different, and that's a really important thing to consider. Now, here's a really good example and a visualization of how that works. This is actually a tool that's used for search engine optimization. So people who basically are trying really hard to make sure that their web page shows up very high on a search engine search. And what it does is it allows you to do the same search on two different search engines simultaneously and then compare the results. So I did a search on this term, physical effects of steroid use by high school athletes. And I searched both Bing and Google and did a comparison of the results. And what this shows you here is that the white dots are basically these are websites that were found by Google but were not found by Bing. The white dots here are websites that were found by Bing but not found by Google. The blue dots connected with the lines are websites that both search engines returned. So what it tells us here is that really there are only about 32% of the websites that are actually overlapping between the two. In other words, 2/3 of all of those websites are not in both search engines. They're in one search engine but not the other. So for those of you who love Google but never use any other search engine, which I know is most of you because every time I ask that question in class, virtually every hand is raised on Google and nobody raises their hands on the other search engines. This is a pretty good illustration of why you really should consider other search engines. You're not getting the whole picture with Google. You're only getting about 1/3 of the picture as you are with any of the search engines. So it really makes sense to not limit your searches to only one search engine. Try other search engines. It's okay to see other search engines. You don't have to be married to Google. You can explore a little bit and see what kinds of results other search engines give you as well. So that's one of the key limitations, is that their results are limited. Another issue is that the different search engines will use different logic to rank the results. So if Google comes back with, 100 million results, how the heck does it decide which of those results should be ranked number 1, 2, 3, 4, and let's say up to 20, and which of those results should be ranked 300 million and above? Different search engines have different logic for determining that. So even if they had exactly the same databases, which they don't, what you would see on a search would be really different because they rank them differently. And that ranking could be a benefit for you, or it could be a problem for you depending on what the search is. So I think it's helpful to understand a little bit about the ranking methodology in terms of how they actually do it. So some of the key factors that are involved in the ranking. Well, one has to do with how frequently the search term is used, shows up in the web page. So for example, here's a search using heart disease as the search term. And the very top page here that came up was mayoclinic.org. And there's a page there on heart disease. Now, if I look for the word heart in that page, it shows up 169 times. So the word heart shows up 169 times on this page that shows up very highly ranked on the heart disease. So the number of times that the word occurs in the web page is one of the factors that will help determine how highly ranked it is. The more often the word appears, the higher it's going to be, the closer to the top. If the word only appears once, it's probably not going to be closer to the top. It'll probably be closer to the bottom. But there are other factors as well. This isn't the only factor. So the number of times the word occurs. Now, by the way, this is really good stuff if you ever build a web page and you want to make sure it's highly ranked on a search engine search. So these are some of the factors that you can keep in mind. Another factor, the presence of the word that you're looking for in the title. So again, if I'm looking for the term heart disease, the title of the web page, if it contains those words, it's going to be more highly ranked. Now, the title is not necessarily what you may think it is. It's not this big thing here in the middle that says heart disease. It's not this. That's not the title. The title is actually up here. It's what appears in that tab. So that tab is essentially called the title of the web page. And that title, if it has the word you're looking for, is going to make that appear closer to the top. Now, if the word you're looking for is not in the title, that doesn't mean you're not going to get the result. You will, but it's just that having it in the title is one of the factors that will bring it closer up to the top. Another factor is whether or not the word appears in one of the web page's meta tags or metadata. So the word metadata is basically means, it's from the Greek, it means data about data. So it's the data about the web page. It's the information about the web page. And on a web page, that's contained in something called meta tags. Meta tags are part of the HTML source code. So this is actually the source code for the web page. HTML is the programming language used to build web pages. And there are sections in the metadata, in the source code, where you can place information about the web page, descriptive information. Search engines look at that information, and if they see the search term you're looking for in there, that can make it more highly ranked. Now, the important thing to know is that there are meta tags that you don't actually see in the web page. When you're looking at the web page, you won't actually see those meta tags. You won't see some of that information, but it is built inside of the web page. So if you want to look at the HTML source code for a web page, if you're using Chrome, the easiest way to do it is to just right-click somewhere in the background of the web page, and you'll see this thing appear down here to view page source. And if you select that, that will then take you to the source code for the web page. So here, this is an example of the source code for that web page we were just looking at. And here are some of the the meta tags for that page and some of the information they contain. So for example, if you remember, we were looking at the title of the web page. Well, here's a meta tag that actually establishes the title. And it says, okay, the title of this web page is Health Disease, Symptoms and Causes, Mayo Clinic. And that's what appears up on that tab. Down here we have another meta tag called subject. So we can assign subjects to a web page. Those subjects do not necessarily show up inside of the page. If you've ever done a search and gotten a web page that did not have the word you were searching for, and you wonder, how on earth did this web page come up? It doesn't have the word that I was looking for in it. Well, it's very, very possible that word was there, but it was inside of one of the meta tags where you couldn't see it. So it was built into the web page's source code, but not actually visible. An old trick that's used sometimes for making a page highly ranked is, and this works great where you have web pages that maybe have words in them that are commonly misspelled. So let's say the word is heart, and people have a hard time spelling that. But you want to make sure your web page shows up even if someone misspells it. Well, a very common thing to do is you go into the HTML source code and then you assign keyword and subject meta tags with the word misspelled. So you misspell it every possible way you can think of. It won't actually show up on the web page, but it will be in the source code. So if somebody searches for the word misspelled, your web page still shows up. It's kind of a nifty way to help get you better results when you got people who tend to do spelling errors. Another issue is timing issues. Because we have search engines that are they're sending their bots out to look for web pages and then return the results back, you got to keep in mind that it's not real time. All we know is what things look like at the time that the bot visited a particular website. So if a website suddenly goes away for some reason, maybe it's shut down intentionally, maybe a server is down unintentionally due to a technological problem, or any number of other things happens, that Google or Yahoo or Bing, they don't know that. They're still going to show it in their results. So if you've ever gotten a result and looked at that result and thought to yourself, yes, this is it. This is the absolutely perfect website that I need to go to. And you click on it and then you get that page not found error message. Really frustrating. Well, it's probably because of this situation. The web page either went down, intentionally it was taken down, or it's, again, the server just happens to be down. But Google doesn't know that, so they're still showing it in their database. Until their bot goes and visits it again and realizes that it's not working, they're going to think that it's a perfectly legitimate website. So they have no way of really knowing that. Brand new websites have the same problem. If you build a brand new website, it's not instantly reflected in the search engine's databases. It takes a while for their bots to find it and then for them to index it and include it in their database. And it could take hours, days, or weeks sometimes for that to happen, depending on the situation. So you have to consider that the newest websites are typically, they're kind of biased against here. We're less likely to get information that's brand new. And we're also less likely to know about websites when they go away, because it may look as though they're still there. Now, by the way, when a website goes away, there are a couple of ways around that. We can still actually get to that information. When we do the face-to-face in class, I'll go through and show you a couple of techniques that you can use to still get at that information. And it's really powerful, especially when you get a website that has some really critical piece of information on it that you need to see. So here's some guidelines for effective searches. First of all, have a clear understanding of the specific pieces of information you need to know. So we're going to start again with that. I had that big cloud there showing cardiovascular disease. We need to have a really good idea of what that big picture looks like, and we need to have a pretty good idea of the path we need to take to drill down to the specific piece of information we need to know. Next, we need to have research questions written. We need a research question for each one of our pieces of information that we're trying to get to. So we don't want to have just a broad, vague, overarching topic. We want a research question for each one we're going to do multiple searches there. Based on those questions, we want to know the best search terms to use and synonyms to use. So those questions are going to help lead us to the words that we want to actually search for. I think having a thesaurus on hand is a really good thing to do, because when you can start to come up with some synonyms for some of those key words, it helps us give us some other opportunities and other options for doing the searches. Heart, cardio, cardiovascular. Again, we can kind of think about this and go on and on and on, but we think about all those related terms. Some of them may be synonyms. Don't want to focus entirely on one search engine. If you're not finding the results you need, use other search engines. Don't get locked in on Google. That's probably one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give you. Use Bing, use Yahoo, try them all on multiple searches. Now, if you're finding what you need right away in Google, great, not a problem. But I would still encourage you to try the other ones too, because you may find other things that you didn't know about that you wouldn't have known were there. And then finally, incorporate some of the advanced search techniques that we're going to cover in class. And we'll go through those, and I'll show you some really nifty tools that are built into all the search engines that will help you do some really creative stuff when you're doing searches. So we're going to go way past just typing the word into Google and hitting the search button. There's much more we can do beyond that. So with that said, we'll go on to the advanced search engine tools in class. And again, make sure to do the reading to go along with this, but we'll continue this with our face-to-face.